Уважаемые коллеги,
Colleagues, good morning. Let us start the work of the section dedicated to the Russian education in the context of international indicators. This is the session to start the second day of the Gaidar Forum in the premises of RANEPA. I'm glad to welcome you within the framework of that forum also. I'm glad to welcome you on behalf of the International Agency Russia Today. The topic which we're going to discuss is dedicated to the Russian education in context of international indicators. We're going to discuss that topic following a big analytical report which was prepared by the team of the Presidential Academy. Let me remind you that the Presidential Academy represents Russia in the global biggest program on the statistics in the educational systems. The program is being implemented by the OECD organization, and therefore we can do some analysis following the benchmarking and the indicators which were developed. Let me remind you that this report, in essence, is a follow-up of a big work which has been done by a team of investigators starting from the year 2003. In a sense, this is the third presentation in a row, and three targeted investigations and studies have been prepared on the regional differentiation of the indicators, a study about teachers and a study about the students. We are going to discuss such important things as the objectives of such benchmarking international investigations and studies. We'll take a comprehensive approach. This is one of the biggest programs which allows us to analyze the system of education in general, the national system and the international system in a set. We will have a look at these aspects as well, and we will also look at the development of the Russian vocational education. With us are the director of the R&D Institute of Monitoring Statistics for Education of the Federal Institute of the Education Development, Mr. Agranovich. Also, I'm glad to introduce to you the Deputy Minister for Enlightenment, Mr. Basyuk. I'm glad to introduce to you Marina Borovskaya, Deputy Minister for Science and Higher Education of the Russian Federation. With us are Yefim Rachevsky, Director of School number 548 from Tsaritsino, Director of FIRO RANEPA, Mr. Dulinov, President of the group of enlightenment companies, Mr. Kozhevnik, will join us a bit later, and the first deputy for education from Yugra will join us in 5 minutes. Let me pass the floor to Mr. Agranovich for his keynote presentation. We have the big screen in front of us. Mr. Agranovich, over to you. As is most convenient for you. Good afternoon, thank you for coming. For us, it is very important to get your feedback, to share our views. And this is very important not only to assess what we have done, but this is crucial in terms of understanding where to progress further, where to move further. So the OECD embraces 36 countries which do participate in that program, and every year the OECD publishes a thick volume on the indicators in the educational systems. This is the biggest statistics document on education in the world. This program, as I said, comprises of 36 countries from the OECD member states and Russia. Why we need that? So ratings is the last thing we need that for, because no one uses that in order to do the ratings, although any person may calculate any rating he or she wants. Ratings do not matter. So the rating, this is a kind of representation, and that's it. The question is, what is going on? Why my country, whatever it is different? Why is it different from other trends where we're moving to? Are we moving in the right direction? So these are the questions which are pivotal for us, especially when we look at the international statistics. Now, if I may, let me say a few words about the features of the international statistics. Really has some individual features. I will not deep dive into them, but lack of knowledge of these features may change the way we treat that, we interpret that. Let me divert from the topic. One of the former Soviet republics located in Central Asia invited an expert which calculated the load put on the shoulders of the students and came to the conclusion that the load is too heavy. They had to change the curriculum, they had to change the textbooks, manuals, etc. They have changed all that. Afterwards, we looked at that and we said, look guys, your expert is wrong. So, according to the international statistics, the hour in class is equal to 60 minutes, not 45 minutes. Because actually, in some countries, the academic hour is 35 minutes or 50 minutes, and therefore, actually, every country does the calculation in 60 minutes denominations. Therefore, you see the load of your students 25% bigger than it is in reality. And it means that actually your students are underloaded. So these standards were changed again, so the textbooks were denied, and it was quite costly for the country, but fortunately it was not the country's budget which funded all that, but the World Bank. You have to know these features of the international statistics. Let me highlight several of those features. First of all, the tertiary education, which is translated into Russian as the higher education, is very different in terms of training the specialists. That's why when we speak about the tertiary agreement, we have to understand whether it is a higher education or postgraduate studies. The secondary education in the world is perceived not just like in Russia as a comprehensive secondary education, but in a broader sense. And Russia includes the first 2 years of the high school education, and it increases the volumes, etc., etc. Otherwise, it is a nonsense when you do the calculation, when you do the management. And the second thing, this is about the financial indicators. So the financial indicators are recalculated, not following the exchange rates proposed by the central banks, but the calculation is done on the purchasing power parity.
Vocational, professional,
And usually the set of the commodities and services and products being sold are matched with the one which has been sold in the United States. This PPP, purchasing power parity, acts as an exchange rate if we do the calculation following the exchange rate proposed by the central bank, it would be 60 rubles per dollar. But for instance, if we use the PPP, then the exchange rate would be about 25 rubles per dollar. So what it means for us, if we look at that table, we will see that this is how we got that very strange figure, 23,000 something dollars a year. this is the salary paid to the teachers. So this is actually what causes a lot of indignation from among the people. So they say this is probably a misprint. So these are rubles, not dollars. Other people would use tabooed words in order to characterize that. How we do the calculation? First of all, we do the calculation using the PPP, purchasing power parity. And this is not 60 rubles per dollar, but rather 25 rubles. And this is net of taxes. So it means that it includes all the taxes. And in order to get the appropriate figure, you have to multiply that by 3.2. And this is the way we get these $23,732 a year, unlike what the Russian Statistics Committee shows to us. So this is what I had to tell you in terms of my introduction. Let me deep dive into the details. So the education is connected with the economic development. But we do not know what to start with. But still, on the slide we see that the higher the share of the population with a higher education is, the better is the economic development and the higher is the gross domestic product. This is what characterizes the economic development, but actually two countries are outliers in that sense. Russia, meaning that our population is very much educated, and bear in mind that criteria, our GDP has to be 3 times higher, and the dots on top, this is Luxembourg, which GDP is very high, but the level of education is quite low. Luxembourg is a total outlier in terms of the education, because they have the highest salary paid to the kindergarten teachers, and the school teachers are only second to them in terms of the salaries. Why Russia doesn't use such a competitive edge as the education of their population? In order to do that, to understand that, we decided to look at what is different from the global tendencies and trends. First of all, let me speak about school. We have too few school leavers with a professional certificate which will be acknowledged at the labor market. That's why the school acts as a kind of an institution which lets you get prepared for the university. So the labor market is not interested in the school leavers, people with a secondary education. So in general, the level of education in Russia is 77.5, and it is higher than the OECD countries. But speaking about the secondary education, we can boast only 68.2%, much below the OECD countries. Then higher education. So here we speak about the vocational, professional education, etc., etc. And we see that lots of students there are the ones with the vocational education. This number is 2.5 times more than in the OECD countries in general. At the same time, so the MA students are more interesting for the labor market because the employment rate from among the people with the vocational education is 78%, and MA students or specialists are 86% employed. We have lots of students which study by correspondence, but this is not typical of the BA students, but also this is typical of the postgraduate students and postdoc students, and we have much less postgraduate students and postdoc students compared to the OECD countries. Next thing. So the specialties being trained, we see that we train more engineers, more people involved in the production. Unfortunately, we actually train less specialists in statistics and mathematics, so less people with arts and humanitarian science education. This is our tendency. This is something we have to discuss. Whether it complies with the labor market, whether it complies with our economic development level and the tendencies and trends of the economic development in Russia. And last but not least, I want to tell you about education in Russia is that we have a very low level of involvement of adults into training and education. In Sweden, 70% of adults are eager to get extra education. People after age of 25 will continue their lifelong education, getting the first or the second higher education, or what is called the additional education. So in Russia, only 20% of adults are eager to do that. So these figures are underrated a little bit. This is due to the features which we used in our study. Even if this figure is not 20 but 25, still this is very few. From among the countries which provided the data, we are among the flunking. We are outperforming only Turkey. In the advanced countries, more and more adults are getting involved in the educational process, getting retrained and getting advanced training. Expert of the education. So we have no issues, no problems with that. Russia is a net exporter of education. That means that we accept more students from abroad rather than having our fellow citizens studying abroad. So in general, we take the fourth place, second to the United States, the UK and Australia. So what this indicator means, this is the share of the market of the educational services, the number of foreign students in Russia compared to the total number of international students all over the world. 7% of all the international students in the world study in Russia. But in that sense, we have some peculiarities, some features. First of all, we are number 4, and this is backed mainly by the BA students. So it means that we accept a lot of BA students, whereas most countries of the world, developed countries of the world, accept mostly MA foreign students, and they have a lot of postgraduate and postdoc foreign students. So in terms of BA students, 6, and in terms of postdoc and postgraduate studies, we are number 10. So it means actually we are providing a lower level education, not in terms of the quality, but rather in terms of the content. So who is coming to us? First of all, these are the people from the CIS countries, from the former Soviet Union. This is the bulk of the international students. Some figures, several percentage points, these are people from India and China. And as for the rest, these are other countries. Africa, Asia, etc.
Из стран ОЭСР к нам едет только
Only 1% come from of students come to us from OSCE countries, while in the OSCE countries, this internal student exchange is about 27%. So our students come from one OECD country to another country, and they form about 27%. Next point, funding of education. It is clear that the level of funding of education is closely connected with the level of economic development of a country. The richer a country is, the more it can spend on education. This is the point in the upper hand right corner is Luxembourg, where they spend a lot on education, and they are much higher than any other country in the world. As regards Russia, our per capita expenditure on education is so small. You see it in the lower left-hand corner. So it shows the level of our development. And is it enough to achieve our ambitious goals? And we should also mention that the share of the state in expenditures on education is higher in Russia than in the OECD countries, and if the level of funding of tertiary and especially higher education, we are close to the average OECD level. Our funding of school education, secondary and primary school education, is much lower. An important indicator and integral indicator is the expectancy of education. There are two such indicators. One is average length of education, and the other is called the average expected length of education. So the first indicator is how many years has our current population spent on education, and the expected length of education is how long will spend in educational institutions 5-year-old children today. So the expected length of education in all countries is developing, and it is higher than the existing length of education. Well, for example, the progress, you see the red flags, is the ratio of the expected length of education to the length of education which we have spent, which we have had in our life. This progress exists everywhere, and we see that Russia, in its length of education, that Russia's average length of education, the gray column, is higher than the OECD countries, but the average expected length of education is lower than in the OECD. So it means that if we spend as much time on education as the OECD countries' citizens, our children will spend less time than their counterparts in the OECD. Now, the academic load in hours, which we have mentioned, our indicator is one of the lowest as compared to the OECD countries. Our school children our students spend less time in education than in OECD. It is explained not because we have too few lessons, but because our academic year is shorter. It's 3 or 4 months shorter. Our children have long holidays, and it is of course good, but it means that our children are overloaded during the academic year. And as regards to the structure, we have much more time spent on the national language, on the native language and mathematics, but less arts, less social science, and a second foreign language. As regards the number of hours, well, the OECD has made an assessment, a team's assessment, and it has found out that the number of time spent on studying mathematics and the results shown by students does not exist. So no matter, it is not so important how much time is spent on making people learn the multiplication table. Does not it is not that much. It does not show so much in results. A Russian teacher spends less time in class than in other countries. On the one hand, it is because of the short academic year, and the second time, because in other OECD countries there are teacher assistants. In some countries there are 25%. There's one assistant to one teacher. These people assume a lot of responsibilities, checking students' papers. They do all the paperwork. So a teacher spends more time in class and can give lessons and communicate with pupils. The number of pupils per teacher in our country is somewhat higher than on average in the OECD. It is close to the average indicator of the OECD, and as the average, there is no connection between the average score on Pisa and the number of pupils per teacher. We know that in South Korea there are huge classes and excellent indicators, but this indicator is connected with the share of pupils who show very low results up to the second level of Pisa. So we can say that a number of students in one class results actually in the following situation. A teacher has very little time to work with those students who are lagging behind. As regards teachers' wages, relative wages, in the world it is calculated not like in this country, not average in the region, but average as compared to people with similar professions. We are very close to the average. For example, it is 70% in this country or 160% in Luxembourg, but it doesn't affect the results shown by pupils. There's no statistical connection. The absolute wages of teachers in the Russian Federation, this miserable figure, $23.3 thousand dollars per year, which has given rise to such lively reaction by the readers of this report. Well, it is lower than in the OECD, but the academic results of pupils do not depend until they reach the dotted line on the graph, and there are How can we react to these data? There are three approaches. The first one is everything is bad in our education, everything is bad, we are living in the past, everything must be destroyed and built anew. Second, our education is the best. The world trends do not concern us. We have our own way. And the third approach is that we see our strong and weak points. Let us use more actively our strong points and let us try to solve the problems using international experience. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Agranovich. And the last thing which I would like, which we are discussing, is very much connected with the recent address by the President to the Federal Assembly. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Viktor Basyuk, Deputy Minister of Education of the Russian Federation. Esteemed Mark Lvovich, esteemed colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the forum for this invitation to take part in the expert discussion, which is dedicated to Russian education in the context of international indicators. The work that has been done by the Statistics Department of the Federal Institute of the Development of Education is extremely important, and it merits close attention and careful examination, because we know that gathering data on education systems is further processing is a lengthy and a labor-consuming process, but we understand very clearly too that today the difficulty is in the analysis and interpretation of the data. And recent events are connected with the publication of the preliminary results of the Pisa 2018 assessment. Have shown that there is a lot of speculation with these data, and our colleagues, so-called experts, without deeply analyzing these problems and these consequences, put forward various hypotheses and use these data in order to not to prove the quality of these data, but to prove their own hypothesis, which sometimes results in very dire consequences, and it to the development of an extremely non-objective view of what is going on in the system of Russian education as compared to international systems. Without a serious academic analysis of these data, we cannot say that the changes and the results in the report of Pisa 2018 were caused by certain specific reasons. You need very serious analytical work to do so, and it will and the results have been published recently, and you need not just days but weeks and even months to analyze it before making accusations or declarations connected with the results of Pisa 2018. We should first understand the specific features of the calculations, and Mr. Agranovich mentioned this in his report. We often speak about one of northwestern European countries in the results of Pisa, but very few people try to see deeply look into it, and the specialists we know that specialists have named that country as a country where the literacy and many other skills have been deteriorating. We speak about low literacy of our pupils, but when we can analyze the results and the methodology of the international research, we see that that in 23 countries of OECD and 14 partner countries, there is also a lower literacy, even in those countries which have so some better indicators than the Russian Federation. And colleagues, taking into account that our main our goal is to become one of the top 10 countries in general education. We use integral indicators of international research. We have our teachers become very confused because they understand very little about international research and international indicator monitoring. It is the fate of professionals to work on statistics and to use research. And when today we have a substitution of concepts, it is very bad for the public situation which exists now in the country. At the same time, I would like to stress that the results of the international research give us very important information on various indicators on for example, the share of children who have not reached the basic level of education. We have taken part twice in such public events, and in the first event, which was organized in Russia today, was organized in Russia in December. The indicators, somebody said that the indicators of international research is more important than the average level of our country, because it shows the share of children who have not achieved the basic level. And I would like to mention the Pisa results. Well, the number of children who have not reached basic level in reading and mathematics is lower than 5% in Russia. And Pisa, which has calculated the share of children who are living school without achieving the basic level, the necessary level to survive in society, is a high 21%. So we see that a large part of Russian school leavers, or despite good knowledge that they have received in school, they are not ready to live independently in society. The share of such pupils, more than 20%, shows that we need to change the work of school and of teachers in different directions. And speaking of the importance of control, of having information on those pupils who have not achieved the basic level of literacy, today this control is exercised by means of annual monitoring, which we conduct together with the Ministry of Science and Education. And one of the indicators of this monitoring is the share of pupils who have achieved the basic level of educational achievements by international standards. There are a lot of other indicators. For example, this chance sample of regions of pupils of regions subjectively affects the results that we receive and which we analyze not only as compared with other countries, but also when we compare various regions of Russia among themselves, in order to develop the tools of quality management of the education system, both from the federal level and from the regional and municipal level of educational organizations, which is, in our opinion, very important. Within the framework of the methodology established by the Russian education control body, annually we assess our pupils according to the Pisa model, and we have received the first results already, and we understand what we need to work at conjointly. And besides, we analyze those results too, both in the light of the general trends that we see in the country and in the light of what we see in the regions. But at the same time, the Ministry of Education is to not just to monitor or control the indicators, but also to conduct events which are aimed at raising functional literacy, of which a lot is being said in international international research.
Benchmark research
Цель
OECD regards as the way to promote the international education all over the world. And since 2009, we are implementing the project on the promoting of the literacy from among the students in order to develop a new national system of knowledge for the students of grade 5 through grade 9 in order to develop their functional literacy in terms of mathematics, reading, financial literacy, global competences, and creative thinking. It doesn't mean that we are doing some restructuring, that we are changing our vector and we avoid the subject-based education. Anyway, when building flexible competences, when building creative thinking and global competences, we have to proceed from the subject-based approach, but at the same time, the educational process itself, the technologies for education today certainly are changing. And meta-subject data also being used, although there are some difficulties there, especially experienced by rank-and-file teachers. Meta-subject knowledge is confused with the interdisciplinary data, and therefore we have to advance the training of our teachers so that they could grasp the new content. And since that year, we plan to launch a large-scale project which we will call to the School of Equal Opportunities. First of all, this project will focus mainly on the children with special needs in terms of education under that modern school project in the framework of the public program of school education. For several years, we are paying special attention to the students with low achievements, to the schools which are located in the most indigenous areas, low income students. We have to identify the factors behind the lack of success from among the students. This is the indicator which we cannot measure by several scales, and we cannot propose any unified, streamlined tool how to address the lack of success, lack of achievement, because every person is an individual, every person is unique. There are multiple factors which have to be considered. Another factor when we speak about the advanced training of the students and teachers, we have to change the function of the teacher. We get away from looking at the teacher as a person who brings some knowledge about the subject for children, and actually have to accompany the student on the way of the development, and therefore a very important function has to be played by the teacher, the kind of mediator. When teacher becomes a mediator between the student, between the child and the culture, the medium in which the child is brought up, between the social and we do believe that it will help us to achieve the goals put forward before us, so that our system of education would be in top 10, and this is how we will bring up a harmonious individuality. We continue to discuss the Russian education context of international educators. We have invited speakers which represent different levels of education, and as far as we continue the track related to the comprehensive education, I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Rachevsky, Director of School 548, Tsaritsina. So, are we going to speak about school? Yeah. Okay, I can speak about kindergartens as well. I can speak about something else. Well, Mr. Agranovich, thank you so much. This is with great interest that I listened to him. I read his presentation. And actually I thought, who will gather in that room? So there are no people who are taking decision about the educational threshold for the kindergarten student. And there are no budget decision makers. That's why I do think that this presentation has to be brought to the attention not only of us but of the decision makers, because there is nothing we can impact there. We can only speak up and provide some feedback. I take advantage of the fact that Maxim is present here, so probably we can change something in the framework of the national projects. Thank you so much for this, your presentation. Once I found myself in a very funny situation. My friend arrived from some remote place, and actually I have an alarm clock which sounds very loud, and this alarm sound actually changes centigrade to Fahrenheit, and actually it was very hot, he believed, and this person asked me, how are we going to go outside? Well, Pisa is of no guidance for us, whether we follow Pisa or not following Pisa, so it doesn't matter for us. And then Mr. Granovich, from the very outset, said that which way we are going to go, but who said that we have to go the same way as other countries? For instance, the Netherlands, when they actually started their development, they got rid of their Catholic Church, and probably you know that the same bar was the most favorite watering hole for Rembrandt and for Spinoza. So let us find some unique way for the development. And this program for international student assessment is not the unique measurement tool. We can use something else. For instance, some student comes to the grade 5, and for instance, his mother would say that his grandmother was a mathematician, and therefore he has to be A grader, and he gets only E grader. And then actually she would say that in the previous school where he studied before, he would get only A grades, and then it would turn out that they would give flowers and candies to the teacher on any occasion. I remember Igor Yamorenko, who, for instance, had to make a special MA course following that presentation. I would rather say that we have to peg all the indicators with the productivity. Now let us look at the productivity in Russia. It is about 27%, half of the Dutch one. The Netherlands is not among the leaders. True, true. It's not among the main leaders, so to say. And then I thought about the butterfly effect. Let us imagine, for instance, Mark Agronovich didn't show to us a Hotman curve, where the key stage is the education from among children from age 3 to age 6, the preschool period. When Mr. Bulutov reminded us of Pierce study, and when we looked for the reasons why we won in that pills, it was about or because of the efficient preschool education, regardless of anything. Look, this is the key stage of education which now is reflected in the Federal Law 273. So, fortunately, kindergarten is not regarded in asylum, but rather as an educational institution. Let us compare the wages and salaries of the kindergarten teachers and schools. So this is very much below the international statistics. 10 years ago, the State Duma said, let us not call them the supervisors, kindergarten supervisors, let's call them teachers. And for instance, in Luxembourg, they are called MA teachers, and they have the high salaries. So let me speak about the butterfly effect. So that was a brilliant presentation. So, but what do I have to do? Let's have a look at one trend. Kindergartens. Mr. Putin yesterday spoke about the demographic abyss which we have approached. Remember when the governors brought the green folders with the statistics on the attendance in the kindergartens? Now the folders would be not green but blue. So last year we have 1 million more first graders. So what do we have to do now? Do we have actually to change the ratio of kindergartens to schools or not? Let us look at Moscow. For instance, the regulatory budget per person since 2007, regardless of whether this is lyceum or gymnasium or just an ordinary school, the rate is the same. So in 7 years period, before only 7-1 school gave us the winners of the contest level, of the international Olympic level, etc., etc. Last year alone, we have about 300 schools out of 391 schools out of 600. More than half of the schools actually provided necessary winners and best students. This is because they are all paid equally. So high quality, equal education is accessible for everyone. Another thing, for instance, integration of the preschool education and school. We like very much the word succession or continuity. And for us, this is total nonsense. And I'd like to say that this integration resulted in a discovery. So discovery number one is that this psychosomatic categorization which emerged 60-70 years ago, it doesn't work. And I spoke about that several years ago at the Gaidar forum. I told guys, the first graders are totally different people. And these people who come equipped with information, etc., etc., they know everything about minerals, about soil resources, and they come to the teachers and say, give us this and this, and instead they are to take the duster and bucket and wash the windows. And still, there are lots of cues at school. For instance, what's the difference between the sun and the moon? So the second grade class. What's the difference between the moon and the sun in grade 6? Actually, they are not eager to answer. And let me get back to what Mr. Agranovich did with his colleagues. That's a very important thing. So, for instance, let us rename the kindergarten workers into teachers, and therefore the competition would be totally different. And let us introduce the educational threshold. So actually, a lady 18 years old cannot work in the kindergartens because she has no knowledge, she has no life experience. For the first time, the threshold for entering Moscow universities is now quite high. So teachers in Moscow do not do any paperwork, and that's true. So the paperwork flow is reduced almost to zero thanks to the information technologies. Teachers, most part of their life, interact with the children. The same is true of the school principals. The structure of the education management has not changed since 1917. Well, do we need municipal level of education management or not? In Yakutia, when one settlement to another settlement is about 600 kilometers, probably it does need, but for instance in Moscow, which has a much denser population, it doesn't need anything like that because we have cloud technologies, cloud computation. Mr. Granovich, can we make sure that our new Prime Minister is familiar with that presentation? Thank you so much. Well, let's have a look at what's going on in the regions. Therefore, I do think that would be expedient to pass the floor to the regions. Over to the first deputy head of education department of Yugra, Pozniak Snizhana. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Probably it doesn't make sense to repeat myself, although let me note how important this presentation is, especially for Khanty-Mansi region. The previous presentations which were prepared, thanks to Mr. Gronovich, are actively used when do some forecasting and building strategy for the development of the social economic structure of the region. It provides huge knowledge database. Therefore, we can check those assumptions proceeding from the strategies and the tools and the results, which are already being presented in those reports. That's great that now we have that presentation, and most importantly, they have to be systemic. We have to provide for some succession, some continuity, that we could use them every year in certain sequence. Speak about the Russian Federation, certainly. Russia is not Moscow alone. It is more diverse, and therefore the presentation of the report provides for information about diverse countries with different territorial structures, different transportation accessibility, rural and city population. Here we see a very diverse view of the system of education, of the international trends in education. Every region, in that sense, may choose most promising areas of development for themselves. And as Mr. Rachevsky said, we may come up with certain assumptions which later on could be implemented in our regional agenda, understanding on the one hand that compliance with the legislation, the public strategy in education is of the federal domain, and that's why this presentation has to be rammed home to the government, and you have to build your strategy following these big data, but on the other hand, and this has already been discussed for several years, we have to bear in mind this diversity of the constituent members of the Russian Federation, and some elements of the management of the system have to be somehow delegated to the regions.
Proceeding from the social economic background of a territory, because, for example, the Khanty-Mansi autonomous district is not a typical region for Russia, and everything that concerns its development, well, thanks to our colleagues, since 2008 we have been working very actively, including preparing public reports on the strategy of the development of the region and comparing it with international data and with territories which are similar to our district and on which we can rely so that our comparisons will be correct and our hypothesis be close to reality. And we have discussed the importance of preschool education, both for children before 3 and from 3 to 7. And it was a proposal has been made that was necessary to provide new facilities and perhaps to create some standard facilities which contain everything which is necessary. But on the other hand, we understood that our territory is special because of its climate and its territorial possibilities. We need to create such kindergartens where children could get as much as possible, including additional education, improving their health, and we should take into account that a very large part of the year the weather is very cold and the day is very short. Daylight time is very short in our region. So I think that the Council of the Federation can use the results of our work, and we are now adjusting our strategy of economic development and relying on the existing data. We are using them very actively. Thank you very much for this opportunity to use this report for further development of our activities. Thank you very much, Alexandrovna. I would like to make a specification. The Khanty-Mansi autonomous district is unique for the Russian Federation, well, perhaps except for Moscow, where the higher education institutions are part of the regional system. You are its founders, among its founders, and so this can be the basis for developing the regional policy. Or perhaps you should use it as the basis for special blocks and subsystems. Well, of course, nowadays we consider it as for one reason we have regional universities, we can develop our personnel potential, and we can adjust the admittance conditions, and we can reflect in our the needs of the region as concerning its need for skilled human resources. And if we continue speaking of the requirements to preschool system teachers, we must all very seriously work on higher education, because sometimes when teachers who come from average vocational educational institutions are more in demand because their education is more practice oriented, and it is very much and it is as important for preschool educational institutions as university teaches theory-oriented approach. Thank you, Snezhana Alexandrovna. Mr. Basyuk, wanted to make a comment. Yes, I would. As regards the handover of the powers to the regions, it's a multifaceted and complex issue. The ministry has been working for 3 years on this subject, which is conventionally called regionalization, that is development effective models of management of education within a region, and it does not mean that we want regions to take the system of education from municipalities. We want 85 effective models of management of education in the country, because from one year to another, the responsibility of a region for education has been growing. Yesterday we heard the president saying in his message that moral upbringing is a part of the state function, and he also says that it is necessary to provide it, and we know that the governor must, by the 1st September of 2013, re-equipped, because now he must provide food for children there, and it is the mayor who is in charge of this whole affair. And now we have already an effective models which show how this could be made best, but taking into account those specific features of which Yefim Lazarevich mentioned. When there are regions where one school is from another is situated from another at the distance of 200 kilometers, and a totally different situation. I'm sorry, I will need to go very soon. So let me speak about the average professional education and about world trends. Well, in this sector, average professional education, comparing with international indicators, must understand that our system of average professional education is somewhat different. It is oriented at several factors. It is, of course, caused by regions, by the economic specific features and social things. We understand that if a child from a village or a little town goes to study in a university in the center of the region, in the capital of the region, he most often does not go back to his native place. And if he goes to study in an average professional education institution, he will more probably go back. But we need to create conditions for his the professional development, and we have some double orientation of the average professional education system, because there are some young people who go in order to learn a profession and to work according to it, and there are others who want to continue their education afterwards in a university. So the competition per one place in the average in the regional average professional education system is 1.7, and the average and the competition for one place in professional education, average professional education at universities is 2.61. So that's very characteristic. But we shouldn't say that our system does not develop in accordance with the international trends, because it shows the results of it is shown by the results of our students in international competitions on skills, like, for example, the performance of our Kazan students. Thank you very much. Thank you for your participation and comments. We understand that the population's attention to the system of average professional education has been growing and will grow. There are optimistic forecasts, because more people will go to such institutions, and the competition will grow. More people want to get because the best school pupils go to colleges in order to further get higher education. And this analytical report shows that the development of professional education is one of the key issues. And now I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Science and Higher Education, Marina Borovskaya, sorry. Thank you. I am grateful for the opportunity to hear the comment. I discussed it with Mark Lvovich already, and I would like to say that the system of international indicators, which since 2004 has been developing in the country very actively, ratings have appeared, and we have received an opportunity to see ourselves in the international competitive environment. Russia began to position itself internationally to look into demand for educational curricula, and also there was a demand for persons for individual curricula. It has become possible to go from one university to another to get a master's degree, for example, and now we have demand of a person for multidimensional education, and in a connection with his own requirements of his employer, and there's also a demand for international infrastructure. And when Snezhana spoke about more standard models of universities, well, today the approach to the model or typical project, it is not just a typical building; it is also information hub. It is also normative. It also includes normatives for per capita funding, and of course the human resources approach. And when all those positions are taken together, we can see that there is a certain infrastructure in development which allows individuals to develop this education and to bring it into that infrastructure where they are going to work. We have a very good experience of working under the education project. We see that Russia's role has become much more active and is becoming more active in the world. And in the latest years, we have gone too much into academic publications, and thus we have weakened the methodological resource, which was a very strong part of the Russian system of education. It used to be very strong. I have been for 1 year and a half in the ministry, and I can say that when we announced a grant or when we looked at the methodologies proposed by colleagues, we have been horrified. The international community has been very enthusiastic about our methodologies, but we know that for several years we have not been working on methodologies, and we need to start working there to strengthen our methodological base. China still uses our old methodologies, and other countries, I can give lots of examples, but the digital approaches have changed, technological solutions have changed, subjects have changed, the sphere of competence has changed. It is necessary to take all this into account. We have been talking a lot about what our approaches should be put into practice, but last year we discussed a lot discussed national projects very much, and we have tried to formulate our national projects as tools of support for managing solutions. There are new opportunities for the national project, which is called New Opportunities for Everyone. It is not just a project, it is a tool fitting it into the system of continued education, lifelong education. We give an opportunity to people to take part in it through additional education. This tool will give us a possibility to take into account all the age categories of personnel, because we understand that the limitations on the labor market could result in a disaster. When we have analyzed all the national projects in the country, and we have seen that the system of education, the system of learning is is uh, uh, is provide more than 33 millions of units of education in on all areas, including demography, economy, etc. But we are incapable of doing this. We have also shortage of personnel, so we need to increase labor productivity. Yes, we have a project on increasing labor productivity and providing employment. We want all of the leavers of the graduates of universities to be employed. Now we see that only 72% of them, about 28% are left behind. So either our planning is wrong, or there is some disproportion in industrial or territorial planning. So we have changed our approaches, and it allows us to analyze international trends, international indicators, and we understand that it's important for us to react to competitiveness of universities for expert of education, but expert of education from 37 to 47,000 6 years ago. Now we have 200,000 foreign students. You understand that this changes our approaches. We should provide new methodologies for their socialization, for them to fit in into education processes, to be included into the education and social sphere which we want. Otherwise, we will make tensions in regions. There will be some enclaves, some tense groups. We must work here. So I believe that analysis and assessment of such indicators in the world and in the country is really an important task for economic development and predictions, forecasts. I love statistics. I understand that support of technological solutions and making such solutions is impossible without having a general picture. So I would like to call your attention to all the national and federal projects that we have in the country. We are discussing the role of regions in all these instruments, and we wanted to these tools our tools become a subject of a very close study, and so that these tools turn to mechanisms which would allow us to put into practice the trends that we see that are not quite well developed. Thank you very much, Marina Alexandrovna. You have touched upon a very important subject regarding specialists working or who worked in the sphere of education. Perhaps, Maxim, you will continue. Colleagues, nobody will never be fully satisfied. No employer and no customer will be always happy with his employees or his or those who ensure his his orders to be done. And so we should be very clear-minded. We should see when the real point when something doesn't work is reached. It has been shown in the funding area. There is a point at which increasing funding does not increase the results. So simple tools in complex systems work with various effects. It is not always obvious, so setting the tasks to resolve a problem is not so simple and so linear as we would like it to be, or as many are accustomed to. Well, simple instructions sent by the administration to the regions and further transferred to municipalities and schools will not improve the quality of education. Going back to the report, the connection between taking a decision to improve the quality of education and of the results in the international Pisa research, we see that the more decisions are taken at the central level, the worse the results are. But statistics is not just a conglomerate of data. Well, there's very little secret information nowadays. Practically all information is in the public domain. And if you look at those data, it is written what these data mean. So it is we should not enjoy ourselves and make some illusions, but we should look into the report and to understand what it is written. We see, for example, why do we need, for example, a very good result in PISA by 2024? Is it good for reporting or is it good for the pupils? If it is necessary for pupils, let us analyze in which countries the results are better and whether we need it.
Especially this is typical of the higher education. It has a lot of significance when trying to focus on rating. We do not understand why this or that rating was proposed. Speaking about the deficiency of the professional competences in the professional community, we have to understand why we need those competences. One thing about that, which I'd like to highlight, is that sadly, RANEPA analytics will go on, but it will continue in the years to come in some targeted areas, because every year publishing the same report doesn't make sense. It won't change a lot. And in terms of the national interests, what concerns the educators and students will provide you with analytic data so that you could take some decisions. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Today, apart from the keynote speakers, there is a number of outstanding scientists, experts, and we still have some time in order to give you an opportunity to provide a feedback. If you have any comments or any feedback, you're most welcome.
Коллеги. Коллеги, спасибо.
Then thank you so much. If I may, I will pass the floor to Mr. Granovich for his words of conclusion. There is a question. Please introduce yourself.
Хорошо. Добрый день. Меня зовут Карина Желкубаева.
Karina Zhilkubayev from the Eurasian Economic Commission. I have a question to Mr. Granovich and probably to the colleagues from the ministries. You started your presentation with the statistics and international indicators. You mentioned the OECD report. My question is related to how we are using the standardized classification, because we are keeping track of some indicators in the education, and Russia is the only country in the Eurasian Union which doesn't provide us with the necessary information about that. To what extent Russia managed to make friends with that classification? Thank you so much. Thank you. Actually, I have the following question. Who is the provider of your education? Because, first of all, we participated in the MSCO 1. Secondly, this is something that we have agreed with the OECD and is available on the websites of UNESCO and OECD. If your data provider is not familiar with that, then probably we have either to change the provider or we have to educate him. Thank you. More questions. We now have the second question. All the information which is provided by Russia to the OECD and to the UNESCO statistics is in full compliance with international standards. And this is true of all the indicators. So let us look at that question in more detail. Thank you so much. Thank you. Tarasov Valery, Rector of Economic Institute, unfortunately was late for the beginning. I have the following question. So the per capita funding, does it include the salaries of directors, for the accounting office, of rectors, prorectors, etc.? I'm not in the position to take that question. I think that this question is not mine. Snezhana probably would rather take that question. Well, in compliance with the regulations which regulate that process, we have the main stakeholders which provide services under auxiliary personnel, including the accounting and other housekeeping services. So this is not the only source of income for universities. University is always about R&D work. This is about other types of activities, different investigation studies and grants. And in terms of the overhead costs, the funding is covering 10%. This is what is provided by the regulation. Thank you so much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, still we have to call it a day because our session is almost over. Mr. Granovich, I intend to conclude the session, so there are 3 bullet points. First of all, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. I'd like to thank the speakers and other stakeholders and actors for your remarks, for your feedback. We'll try to take that into consideration. Next year, we will prepare a similar report highlighting the bridge between education and productivity, employment, etc., etc. We'll do our best to do such a report. I liked very much the proposition from Mr. Rachevsky to find the bar to discuss something and follow the way of upgrading and modernization. So let's make a revolution for the Russian education. Thank you so much. We are open for a dialogue, for any dialogue. Get in touch with us. We may answer any questions which we managed to answer. Thank you so much. Thank you, dear colleagues.